Welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. I'm Ramananda Sengupta. Today we are going to be discussing the view about the Trump presidency from the West, which is basically the US and Europe. And our very, very special guest today, Mr. Richard Rossow, Senior Fellow at the Vadwani Chair in US-India Policy Studies at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., and Velina, Tchakarova, Political Analyst with decades of experience in international affairs. Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate having you with us.
Of course.
Let me start with Richard. Under the Trump administration, there was a strong push for the U.S. to sort of, start with America first to begin with. So, what are the opportunities and challenges that you see, as the U.S. reassesses its global trade policies?
Yeah.
How do you think India can navigate its trade surplus without the U.S., without straining ties?
Yeah, it's a difficult issue. The challenges I'll talk about first, and as you kind of point out, commercial is probably the major realm where I think you're likely to have a lot of challenges and frictions again. Even though China got the brunt of U.S. policy attention on trade policy last time Trump was in office, there was actually a medium-intensity trade war with India as well. You saw the United States. India was hit directly with the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. The United States revoked India's trade preferences under the Generalized System of Preferences program. India initiated retaliatory duties. So a lot of frictions, Make in India and Make America Great Again really did kind of come into conflict. And the president was directly pushing India to buy more American products, particularly in areas the government of India controls like oil and defense, to try to offset our trade deficit. Of course, on the flip side, India's got a much larger trade deficit than the United States does as a percent of its economy. So India was able to accommodate some of the president's desires. And luckily, it didn't spill over. The two leaders still had a relatively warm relationship, even if you had this trade fighting. The opportunity, I think we both still want to make sure that we're collaborating to step up to the challenges that China presents across the range of vectors. On military, on trade, on commercial, on strategic technology. So I think defense relations and focus on interoperability and really stepping up, I think that's the area for real opportunity. But, going back to the first point, even on defense, India wants to see U.S. support for co-production, co-development of emerging defense technologies. I think under Trump, you may see a little bit less interest in that and a little bit more of kind of the buyer-seller relationship. But there are some opportunities as well.
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear, because I think that a lot of people here think that that's a likely possibility. Lena, a similar question to you. How does Europe view the return of a Trump presidency, particularly in terms of traditional transatlantic alliances, such as NATO and the EU and the partnership? How do you think Europe is likely to deal with this Trump 2, as it were? Do you think it's going to sort of lead to some kind of a further push for strategic autonomy now?
Well, it's not a surprise that the European decision makers are actually looking at the return of a Trump presidency with concern, particularly regarding its implications for NATO, the European Union-US partnership. Trump's previous criticism, as we remember, of organizations such as the European Union, but also NATO burden sharing, are still going to be on the agenda, that's for sure. The European Union has already started some sort of working groups and initiatives to prepare accordingly. The expectation is, of course, that tariffs will be once again on Trump's agenda, similarly to what happened during the first mandate. That's going to be, I think, a very serious issue given the quite precarious situation in some of the European Union member states when it comes to economy, but also when it comes to trade issues. Now, when it comes to defense, security and defense, here once again, We've already heard some speculations about 5% of GDP for defense spending. And just as we speak, first countries in Europe have announced their readiness to, in fact, increase the spending on defense by, to actually 5%, such as with Baltic countries. Probably some more will join, but this will be a very, very big issue in my view as well. So all in all, trade, definitely, not only when it comes to the relations between the European Union and United States, but also individual member states and United States, but also when it comes to the relationship with China, of course, that is going to be a big issue. And then, of course,
I see. Mr. Sullivan, the thing I'm looking for, the other thing that is very, very curious about knowing is that just, I think his last visit by Jake Sullivan before he sort of, limited office at the Verve was to India. Is that a sign of some sort of continuity, or do you think, the US-India defense partnership is set for a rejig?
That one's for me.
Yes, that was for you.
Yeah, well, having that visit again, the fact that Jake Sullivan put on the table areas of technology collaboration, I think a lot of that will probably be maintained. We both want to make sure we're working together in areas like AI. I think some of the areas we're talking about on space technology, where the United States is willing to potentially remove some of our own export controls that could actually help U.S. sales, but also help India's space industry improve and modernize. Those are areas of complementarity that I suspect a lot of what we saw in the announcement when Jake Sullivan was in India, I think are things that I imagine that the Trump administration would probably like to support and double down on. And you talk about continuity. I mean, there's a lot of rumors, more than rumors, I would say, that in fact, the first major substantive foreign policy engagement the Trump administration may have might be a Quad ministers meeting happening the day after inauguration. So talk about a handover to have a meeting, with Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor in India, and then less than 2 weeks later, have a Quad summit happening here in Washington, D.C. just after inauguration. I suspect, again, India, of course, Japan, and some partners will see prioritization across administrations that they have over time. So I think my lane on the U.S.-India lane is probably a bit more stable than a lot of my other colleagues around town working on other geographies.
Since I know that you already have another meeting scheduled in the next few minutes, let me ask you another quick question so that, I just to put the whole thing in perspective. There's a lot of, or rather a belief here in the foreign ministry that, we have dealt with Trump before and we think we can deal with him now. How valid is that assumption?
I think it's relatively fair. I mean, we don't know every single day what President Trump is going to do. A lot of times announcements are made, sometimes even via social media, in new areas that they want to push on policy. And it's a little bit like riding the surfboard during a tidal wave, maybe. But what some of the core big picture drivers are. It is about confrontation with China, stepping up to the threat that we see there. It is about helping rebuild American manufacturing. It's about creating jobs, particularly, in the areas like my home state of Michigan that have seen a lot of manufacturing leave. So I think the big picture drivers that we know President Trump responded to last time and is doing so again, we know what those key elements are. The day-to-day stuff is where you've got some wobbliness, but as long as you focus on the big picture things, and if India were to put things on the table, to talk about Indian companies expanding manufacturing in the United States, which they've been doing, about India looking to buy more in strategic areas from the United States, and Trump wants to sell. There's areas of complementarity that I think, irrespective of what some of the day-to-day nuance of policy is, India is going to be able to adapt to, and I think play pretty well to the Trump camp.
That's again, a positive thing that I'm hearing from you compared to your last.
Positive in an era of wobbliness. It's not going to be smooth, and there are going to be tough days. I mean, to see President Trump last time, every time he was given a microphone, calling out Prime Minister Modi directly for tariffs on Harley Davidsons, right? You get these kind of things that happen pretty consistently. And luckily, India didn't take overdue umbrage in moments like that and was able to, maintain some consistency. So India's going to have to suffer from some things. Reduction in U.S. promotion of American strategic tech companies investing in India. So it's not going to be perfect and smooth, but I think India navigated it really well last time, and I think we'll do relatively okay again. So I'm not trying to put too much gloss on it.
Velina, let me just ask you the last question.
Sure.
Could we, look at Europe's role, particularly vis-a-vis things like Ukraine and tensions in the Middle East? How is that likely to play out under Trump, and how does Europe see itself in that position? I mean, what do you think Europe expects from Trump vis-a-vis Europe and vis-a-vis Ukraine and the West Asian crisis?
Well, first, let me just give you my 2 cents what I expect from Trump's administration towards Europe. When it comes to the three, in my view, the three most relevant hotspots. First being the Russian war against Ukraine, second being the Israel-Hamas war in the Middle East, and with all the repercussions, because we've seen many other escalatory developments, more concretely, of course, Iran, Israel. And third, and most important in my view, I think that this is going to be priority number one for this administration when it comes to geopolitical hotspots. That's the Indo-Pacific tensions, the creation of new military facts on the ground when it comes to South China Sea, when it comes to the Strait of Taiwan, new military facts. What I mean by that is that China has successfully militarized the region, the whole region, antagonized a lot of the neighbors in South China Sea, and presented them with new reality that is the so-called new geopolitical normal. And here, my thesis for the next 4 years is that Russia and China, being this dragon bear modus operandi of coordination in strategic domains, will try to create a new situation. That means, of course, below the threshold of kinetic war, but still a number of military drills, tensions, diplomatic engagements, you get it, the full program, so that they can still coin Trump as a war president, because Trump, having these opportunities now in the Middle East and also pushing for at least ceasefire agreement in Ukraine, I think that he will come up this year with a concrete proposal. There will be some optics, meaning, Putin-Trump meeting and some sort of pressure on Ukraine to agree on at least on a meeting and then on a ceasefire. So some sort of seizure of hostilities in Ukraine, ceasefire in Gaza. There you get, you get it, because Trump wants to focus on economics and geoeconomics, not on geopolitics. And from this background, my thesis is that we will see the most serious tensions in South China Sea and in Taiwan. And now I come with my concrete assessment of what Europe is going to do. I mean, Europe is going to be completely overwhelmed with that. First and foremost, because they are not on the same page when it comes to the relations with China, and also when it comes to the engagement. So that means the vision of Europe, how to be more engaged and more serious about what's going on in the Indo-Pacific. Second important point is, of course, as you can imagine, they're not going to be happy about any ceasefire in the war in Ukraine, which leverage to Putin. And I mean, the very fact that there is going to be an optics such as a meeting and photo shooting with Trump, that's a big geopolitical win for Putin. We know that. So this is not going to be accepted very well in the European capitals. Of course, you need to understand, Europe is not a coherent player, and the European member states, 27 in number, are also facing their political challenges at home. There are political forces that are happy with this kind of approach because they want the war to be over. They have more populist, voters at home, where they can present this as a success. And final point: the inflationary impact of this ongoing war is devastating. I mean, the European economies are under immense stress. So all in all, I think that there's going to be a mixture of reactions. Some European leaders, such as Meloni or Orban, they will be I would argue, quite in favor of Trump's policies. They will be supportive. Rutte, who is the General Secretary of NATO, will try to balance he is on good personal terms with Trump. But there will be also issues coming from France and Germany. Germany is having a very important election in February. France is struggling, with the political situation. A lot of the smaller countries are quite divided because they are staunch, for instance, American allies. They want bigger presence of United States on the old continent, and they are conflicted now by these new realities, happening in the global arena.
Great. Richard, let me come back to you with the same set of countries. China, will the fact that both of us seem to have a problem with China strengthen the US-India relationship defense-wise? And Russia and Iran, how does one India navigate that part?
Yeah, my sense is I think with China, you're going to see a continued confrontational approach, which, Trump really defined. I think Biden, for the most part, executed and carried out and maintained. But I will say that there's probably maybe a majority in Washington that feel that he might actually flip the script, that if China were to announce major packages of buying American goods, things like that, that there might be a major deal that's out there on the horizon. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I would say in Washington, for those that are trying to read the tea leaves, they think that this pressure might actually be a push to try to get China to announce, major trade concessions in other areas. So we'll see how that one kind of plays out. I think with Russia, Trump views himself as a deal maker who's got some connectivity with Russia. And I think you might see a little bit increase in pressure on Zelensky to try to come up with a deal and be a little bit more accommodative. But again, I think as we saw last time Trump was in office with Afghanistan, you're going to have a lot of advisors, I think, pushing against that. And they will have some ability, I think, to influence his thinking on it. With Iran, we haven't really had a dramatic de-escalation, from what Trump did on removing ourselves from JCPOA agreement. So I suspect that we'll kind of maintain the level of pressure that we've seen in recent years there. So not a lot of, I think, hope and opportunity on the Iran lane. I don't think so on China. Russia may be the one where potentially, you might see the president taking a bit more of an accommodative approach to try to broker and press Ukraine to agree and bend a little bit. But I think a lot of the advisors are going to push back against that too. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of fights and debates within the administration on how to approach Russia, Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. I realize that we are, down to the last minute because you need to go somewhere else. So I'll just close with the question for Velina quickly. I did have a whole bunch of other questions lined up, but Murphy's Law. I couldn't do much about the last 3 minutes we missed. Velina, do you think that, new Trump White House will actually spark a revival of the right wing back in Europe? It's already started in some places, but do you think that's likely to happen?
Well, first and foremost, I think that Trump is just one of many symbols of the signs of the time, and not vice versa. So in a sense, we've seen this rise of populist movements in Europe, in America, in Asia, practically in Latin America, practically everywhere. It's just the signs of the time. And the processes that have led to the rise of, far-right, right-wing populism, but also if we are having an honest debate on the matter, also the rise of left-wing and far-left extremist populism. So on both sides. And the interesting part is that when you take a look at the foreign policy orientation, for instance, in Europe, many of these far right and far left, or right wing and left wing, extreme movements and political forces are merging in their ideology when it comes to foreign policy orientation and the way they understand the world and the role of state actors. So I think that Trump is just a symptom of the phenomenon happening right now in the 21st century. Nothing is new under the sun. Things are very cyclical. They have structural and systemic roots. that need to be tackled in order to actually deal with the problem. Yes, to some extent, some might argue that it will legitimize, populist narratives. It will strengthen the narratives coming from certain populist forces, for instance, in Europe, because they will have better relationship with Trump. That's for sure. And obviously, there will be media, digital influence coverage, of course. But as I said, things are much deeper, much more complex than to be tackled and especially covered in 2 minutes.
With that, I'm afraid we must close this because I know Richard has to rush. But I would like you guys to promise that we do another one after Trump comes in. Maybe slightly longer. Maybe we'll get 3 minutes more that time. Thank you so very much for taking time out. I mean, I really appreciate this, particularly with your hectic schedules. And I look forward to having you with us again.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. That was Richard Rossow, Senior Fellow at the CSIS and the Wadhwani Chair in India, US-India Policy Studies, and Velina Tchakarova, a renowned strategic and foreign policy analyst, talking to us about the view from the West, as in Europe and the US, about Trump 2.0. I do hope you enjoyed this particular edition of The Gist, and I look forward to having you with us again. Till then, this is Ramananda Sengupta signing out.